Life is a breath. A breath is a rhythm, an inward, an outward, an up and a down. To cease breathing is to die. To stop moving is to be consumed by the rest of the multiverse, by the rest of the universe that continues to breathe, that continues to move. There is, in many ways, a celebratory competition, a celebratory race, so to speak, to breathe in more and more beauty, more and more expansion, more and more wonder of all of it. And to participate is to let energy in and let energy out, and in the process to refine the lens, refine our relationship with energy, moving towards grace, the masterful absorption and release of energy, in the understanding that there is no waste, that that which is, for example, the carbon dioxide that we breathe out is the food for the trees, and the oxygen that the trees breathe out is the food for human beings. In a sophisticated ecological framework, there is zero waste, always. And yet, when we impose a very limited sense of a vision within a very narrow paradigm, we can create the illusion of waste by simply not having a vision or scope big enough to absorb all of the energy presented to us. And in that context, we in our human levels have created the illusion of waste in the form of that which we have condemned, that which we have judged as bad. We have created waste in the form of pain. I don't want it, let's push it away. We have created waste in the form of exuberance. That looks weird, push it away. We've created waste in forms of packing materials. We're done with you, push it away. And in this manufacturing of waste, what we're expressing is the limitation of our box. Because when the multiverse is billions upon billions upon billions of qubits long and wide, and we have our little box that says this is what we want and everything else is waste, we create the illusion of garbage in human beings, in ourselves. We take concentrated boxes and say, this is my goal, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. All these other thoughts are waste. And so we create waste with narrow-mindedness. Pain, unmitigated, leads to trauma. Trauma, unresolved, leads to dissociation from pain. Dissociation leads to helplessness. When we dissociate from something, when something gets too hot to hold, we drop it, we let it go. But at the same time we drop it and we let it go, we cannot influence it. When you're holding something and you want it to change, you move it. And it changes because you're associated with it. When you drop it, when you push it away out of mind, etc., and you want it to change, you have no connection with it. You've dissociated. It leads to a sense of powerlessness. An event occurs in our life that creates pain. The pain is not responded to and attuned to, which leads to a sense of trauma. The trauma is not responded to and not attuned to, which leads to dissociation, which leads to powerlessness. The powerlessness, in many cases, in our culture, is shamed, creating a new trauma, a new something to dissociate, and we come into a state, a traumatized state, that consists of the event, the meaning we assign to the event, the state in which we find ourselves within the framework of the event. The impact that the event has on our life now, for example, my arm is crushed, I have 2 fingers left, my bank account is 0, or suddenly I'm $30,000 in debt. The impact that the events happen and the future that is projected as the momentum of the event moves forward. This is the event. Now, when we are in a state of dissociation from the event, when we are in so much pain that we anesthetize the event with anesthetic, blame an anesthetic, distraction an anesthetic, addiction, compulsive behavior, compulsive thinking, compulsive feeling, an anesthetic. When we lack the skill, courage, and ability to engage with the event, the pain is mitigated with blame, with shame, with distraction, with addiction, with avoidance, with dissociation. When we dissociate, we cannot love, we cannot understand, we cannot empathize, we cannot heal. What we're doing is buying time through the dissociation to, at its best, learn and study so that by the time, for example, if you drop the pot because it's too hot, you have a little bit of a breather, you're not in searing pain, you can maybe learn, study what can go on here, what can go on here, what does one do with this hot pot that's threatening to burn down the house, that's this, what does one do with this? And one can study. But in order to influence the event, we have to then reassociate. Maybe we learn to put on gloves. Maybe we learn to get a fire extinguisher, but we have to engage again with the event. When the event carries too much pain, or too much fear of pain, too much shame, or too much fear of shame, we cannot re-engage with the event, which leaves it in its traumatic state, in its painful state, which demands anesthetic. One of the biggest anesthetics is blame, self-blame, and blame of other people. Now, in order to resolve the event and to heal the future, to transform the momentum that is set in place like this, it's very much, an event happens, it falls into the water and it ripples out across the landscape of the psyche, across the landscape of space and time as a ripple effect, influencing, agitating certain things into being, minimizing certain things into being, changing the probability field towards a particular future. And generally speaking, traumatic events darken the future in terms of isolation, dissociation, loneliness, pain, shame, fear. Now, the next step is the question, can I see, can I understand, can I empathize with the person who participated in this event? Meaning, if you are a rape survivor, you have participated in a rape. We participate in reality by causing it and by allowing it. And we cause and allow things in a variety of different ways. Some of, if you're a 6-year-old child, incredibly unconscious. But nonetheless, there is a participation. I chose to stay silent. I chose to be screamed and be hit. I chose this. So-and-so said, don't go down this road, but I wanted to go down this road and see what happened there. There's a participation. And in the classic victim psychology, the child, the little one, the victim blames themselves. And this is particularly the case when there's overwhelming force. You see, because if a 6-year-old blames their aggressor, and the 6-year-old decides they're going to get revenge or whatever it is, or stop the abuse, they may get themselves killed. And so that aggression, that in an equal dynamic would be led by, no, you don't have a right to this and healthy boundaries, is directed towards the self. In a coping strategy of survival that says that the best odds I have of surviving a fight with a giant is to help the giant beat me, to be an ally of the abuse dynamic, or at least not to fight them head on. Because in many ways, if a giant is attacking a little one, which is how adults are if you're a 6-year-old, if a giant is attacking a little one, it is an expression of profound psychological powerlessness on the inside. I mean, you have to be pretty fragile to be this big and say, gee, I could challenge myself, I could grow, I could be helpful, I could do this, I could go live my life, but I think I'm going to make a 6-year-old feel miserable. That'll be a great accomplishment. I mean, you have to be pretty small before you're... I mean, one of the things it says is you can't tolerate failure. You can't tolerate the chance of losing or losing face, etc. Well, a 6-year-old is a pretty good pick. You know, if you can't be sexual with a grown woman, it's endlessly frustrating or whatever. What's a 6-year-old going to do? She can't run fast enough. Success. You know, but there's a pretty fragile undertone to that level of a target. Like, you know, when your goal for the day is to get out of bed, it's not saying you're in a vital state of health and accomplishment and vitality who can do anything they want with their lives. It's saying, I'm at such a fragile point I could die. You know, I don't know if I can make it through another day. Let's just see if I can get out of bed. And so, you know, in these tensions, you know, you have incredible odds stacked against you as a little one, as a young one, as an individual. You know, a whole crowd has decided to gang up on you as an individual and convince you of their opinion, or, you know, confess and be converted or be burned at the stake or whatever it is. It's not a mature, confident voice, you know, that pits, you know, gang up odds onto an individual or onto a child. And when that happens, very often the victim, the recipient of abuse, participates, allows, surrenders, stops screaming and fighting, goes numb. In the fight, flight, freeze dynamic of trauma, you know, a deer sometimes when, you know, a deer that has been downed by a puma is not going to survive that fight. And so it goes limp. It plays dead. Do whatever you want with me anytime. I'm not resisting you. And sometimes with this freeze, you know, paralysis, which lasts about 20 minutes or so, sometimes the puma, there's no more adrenaline because there's no antagonism. They weren't hungry right at that moment. They're going to rest. They wander off. The deer wakes up, shakes, and then off it goes. Whereas if, you know, a fawn is fighting a puma, there's no way out of that. And so there is a freeze dynamic. But there's also in our culture, because we don't honor this, we don't talk about bully dynamics, we don't talk about gang dynamics. What we talk about is the you know, the importance of the individual. You better do this, and if you don't, you're weak. A gang attacks you, well, kill them. You know, get them all. You know, be a man. You know, whatever. And we don't talk about when to fight, when not to fight, what the power dynamics are in gang theory and stuff like that, because we're an emotionally illiterate culture. We're a psychologically illiterate culture by choice, meaning we don't study the science of human relationship, biology, emotions, the intersection of emotion and we apparently don't think that that's worth our time in our culture, because it's only the driving force between every human action in human history, one, which leads to 90% of our external reality, two. And why would we want to study something so intelligent when we could study how to make a new type of plastic, or how to shave 2 cents off the price of oil? When we could study that, why would we want to study the algorithm of every building block, the building blocks behind every action in human history? That would be way too smart. So in that dynamic, with the shame dynamic, there is a sense of blaming the victim, blaming ourselves. I allowed it. I shouldn't have left the door open. I shouldn't have walked down the alley. If of course people are out there trying to kill me and rape me and humiliate me because we live in a sick world, but it's my fault because I walked down the alley. And so there's a sense of pain. The original wound is masked by a certain amount of this shame and blame and punishment. And we've got to be able to, at some point, return to the event and love the person who participated in the event. To care about the person being raped, the person being beaten, the person being ganged up on, the person being humiliated, the person being systematically hated and ignored by a lover, by a parent, by a school system. We've got to be able to love that person, which means becoming one with them, which means associating with them, which means feeling their pain at the same time that we're healing the pain. You've got to grab the pot to cool it, put it in the water, and cool it down. You can't throw it away and expect it to, on its own, necessarily come to resolution. Sometimes it does. The pot cools down and you threw it away, and you can move it back and clean up the mess afterwards, and you protected yourself from the burn through that dissociation. That's what it's for. The dissociation is temporary pain relief, to allow you to think and learn, because the very fact that you're in a situation that is at that level of pain suggests a lack of mastery. Meaning, if you have complete mastery and you know exactly how to create well-being in that situation, you don't say, well, I could have a nice interaction here, but I think I'm going to burn my hand with a hot pot. That's what I'll do for the evening. Yes, let me make sure to heat the pot really hot, add lots of oil in it because that creates extra burns, and then let me tip the pot over with the oil on my hand because I've got nothing better to do than that. I mean, I could make love with my partner, I could go out and watch the sunset, but let me just burn some oil. So the fact that you're in traumatic pain at some level suggests that there is a lack of mastery, because people with mastery do not choose to inflict pain when certain positive alternatives are available to them. And if you've got mastery, they are. If you don't have mastery, they're not available to you. And out of sheer boredom, desperation to distract from something else, you may hurt yourself. Or it may be an unconscious, I just don't want to feel this, what do I have to do? Well, let's hurt myself in some other way. That pain is very distracting. But we have to come back and look at the event, the meaning of the event. It's a meaning that we gave, and it's a meaning that other people gave, and it's the meaning of our abuser as well. What state are we in? A lot of that has to do with the meaning. A lot of that has to do with our sense of the projected future. What does look like the probable future? What generally happens? For example, a sexual abuse survivor in the United States comes forward an average of 11 years later, and that's speeding up with things like the Me Too movement, but that's the probable future. If you've been sexually abused and traumatized and shamed in the United States, particularly in a power dynamic, the odds are it's going to take 11 years for you to sort it out, hide, and in that time you will be more lonely, your immune system will be weaker, You'll be more scared, you'll be more isolated and distant, it'll be harder for people to love you. That's the kind of thing that often occurs in our culture, using current statistics. It doesn't have to, but that's when you don't interact with that probability field to change it, to understand it in any way. It's not a surprise. It takes 7 years to just, or 11 years to just kind of come forward, and some never do, and some repress it and stuff. So this is the event that we have dissociated from. This is the self that we have dissociated from, often with blame, punishment, and you're a bad person, and I'm a jerk, and I'm stupid, and you're evil, and all this kind of thing to create a dissociation. Now the next step is to move towards when we have the skill and ability to do so. The next step, because this is an influx in energy. This is a breath in. It is a crude breath in. It is a breath in without mastery. So it's got a lot of pain and violation there. In the same way that, if someone sticks a 4,000 psi hose in and sticks it in here and pumps it into your heart, you got some air, but boy, did it almost rupture it was an unskillful breath in. You've let in sensation, energy, in a formation that is terrifying, traumatic, and painful, suggesting a lack of mastery. Self-love. Loving the you at the level of ignorance that participated in the event. I was just a kid. I can love a kid. That's not her fault. I had been pushed into this, and then pushed into this, and then pushed into this, and every time I tried to say no, I was fought. So I gave in. I didn't think it would be this bad this time, and it was. And I loved the person who was trying to survive in a sociopathic environment. Self-love. Understanding the event, understanding how we came to be a part of the event, understanding the impact of the event, understanding all the players involved. Because events are always co-created. It takes a cult to allow a probability field to stay stable. For example, we've had suicides for hundreds of years. And we've never decided to educate our students on the causes of suicide and how to respond and how to help someone in suicide and how to spot someone suicidal, because that is another one of the intelligent things that we would never dream of including in an education system that is designed to teach a series of rote skills that for the most part you're never going to learn or use in the rest of your life. You just got to get your little certificate, which in and of itself is, a trauma to realize that we're that cruel, that we systematically ignore things that people vitally need to live a meaningful life, like how to build a house, how to cook well, how to create and sustain a beautiful, transcendent marriage. Good skill to have, makes enormous difference. We don't deal with that. But if you want to study coding or this or that or the other, or algebra or geometry or anything else that you're likely never going to use for 99% of your life, or could get out a calculator, by all means, go ahead and study and take time out of life to prepare for a future in which bits of paper will be more important than your actual contribution to the culture, because that's all you'll have. A degree, a bit of paper that says you copied the dogma well. So the event, the meaning, the state, the impact, the future, all of this has to be felt, has to be understood. The blame has to be faced, the pain and the scars of blame, like, oh, I blame myself for that, Do I really want to blame a 6-year-old for having a drunken father? Do I really want to blame myself for not being able to fight a gang, a government? Is this kind, is this intelligent? Does it lead me somewhere? Now, self-love is the behavior that facilitates the facilitation of human needs: survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing gifts, creating abundance in the community, transcending personal fixations, desires, and agendas to be in service to something bigger, to leave a legacy beyond the self. From a state of abundance, not a state of jealous poverty where everyone's getting it and I'm not, where I've created enough and given enough to myself that the greatest gift I can give myself is to watch that ripple out and touch other people's lives. And so it's a service and a transcendence from a place of deep self-love and abundance. When you love yourself, take steps that will improve your survival, your security, your love and belonging, you experience healing. Healing of the gap between what you long for and where you are. We all long for happiness. We all long to be loved. When you love yourself, the reality of longing for love and the reality of being loved moves closer together. The pain is mended. The wound is sewn up. Self-love leads to healing. Healing leads to integration, meaning the more pain we heal in our psyche and our reality, the more we can tolerate seeing more and more of ourselves, which is the more we can love and engage with more and more of ourselves. It leads to integration, which leads to self-acceptance and leads to self-forgiveness. We at a deep level understand that at some level we are a participant in every part of our reality. There are no observers. And even though some forms of participation are futile, there is still a participation. A 6-year-old may not be able to kill a giant trying to rape her, but she may have a choice between drowning or jumping off a building and being raped. It's not much of a choice. She may have a choice between telling the truth and goading the person on and trying to kick him, or lying silent and still. Or it may be, a terribly unconscious choice. But there is a participation at some level. Whether to open one's eyes or keep them closed. Whether to say yes when we mean no or yes when we mean yes. There's a participation. And we must make peace with the level of education, giving the shame and inadequacy back to the culture. Of course I'm emotionally illiterate. I'm in an emotionally illiterate culture. I'm in a culture that will send me to a system of education without providing a single formal hour of emotional chemistry. I won't learn how to manufacture hate out of helplessness, pain, and a perception of betrayal. I won't learn how to manufacture hate. I won't learn how to heal hate when others manufacture it. I will remain emotionally illiterate, and I won't do my own thing when I discover how crazy my cult is. I'll pretend to be normal. And so, why did I do that? What's going on here? This is crazy, etc. Can I forgive and accept and see and love and heal the part of me that participated in this event in some way? It leads to self-forgiveness. Only when we can forgive ourselves is the healing complete to a level where we can embrace without intolerable pain that part which we formerly dissociated from, numbed, blamed, addicted, avoided in shame. We cannot understand, love, empathize, or forgive another person or anyone else involved until that state. Because there's too much pain, there's too much emotional charge until we have experienced the healing, which in part, through the understanding and through the forgiveness, decreases the probability of it happening again, which is in part what takes place there. Once we have understood ourselves, we are indirectly understanding others. They're in the same fucked up system that we are. Maybe they chose to abuse other people much more than we did. But we tend to divvy out coping mechanisms. People with strong bodies and stupid minds often become bullies. For example, people with smart minds and weak bodies often become, manipulators or whatever. We all look for adaptive coping mechanisms to survive pain and trauma when we are in a sociopathic environment, an environment where it's not enough to just say, I was hurt, and everyone rushes in and tries to help, where you try and speak and say, I'm hurting, I'm hurting, I'm hurting. And people say, well, if you're gonna say that, we're just not going to invite you over because you're a bore. We don't want to know the truth. We want to invite lively performers over. And this is, the crisis. This is the crisis with the rise to success, where often the most bullied and marginalized people develop very sophisticated, compensating, adaptive personalities that are exactly what's very popular with other people. And they do that. And they do that and become very, very popular, not for who they are, but because they're doing and giving other people exactly what those people want or need and think that they're trying to emulate. It's a very lonely framework of survival, but it's one of the reasons there's a correlation between some of the most popular people and some of the most damaged people at a deep individual level. Understanding of oneself leads to understanding of the abuser. Empathizing with oneself leads to empathizing with the abuser. Accepting oneself leads to acceptance of the abuser. Love and self-healing leads to a wish that your abuser be liberated from the same bonds. This is only at a point of transcending the wound. When you are free of the wound and you understand how it happened before and you understand that you're not going to create it again. When you understand the intuitions, the guidance, the awareness, the truths, when you've taken off the mask and brought in an empowered state that says, no, I'm not going to be abused again in this way. I've understood that dynamic, etc., and that's not going to happen again. When we transcend the wound, we feel a pity, an empathy for those still stuck in the wound. And the abuser is as stuck in the wound as the victim, because the abuser, by definition, is a former victim who internalized some phase of the abuse and is now spreading it forward. The abuser, by definition, when they dishonor some part in you, a boundary, a need, a preference, they have already experienced gross dishonor towards that same region of their own psyche and have been reduced to a sense of shock, powerlessness, grief, pain, etc. And they couldn't deal with it. And they feel so small that they internalize the abuser and identify. When you're very small as a child and you're being abused, and it's too terrifying to identify with you as an infant because you realize you could die. One of the things that happens is infants, children will transfer, and they imagine themselves as the giant bullying abuser beating this bad child. And one of the ways that they survive is they actually identify with their abuser, who feels in that moment powerful, safe, and secure. And so the shock, the trauma, the helplessness, the terror that they can't deal with as a 5-year-old now becomes the confidence, because you're going to win. You're 6 foot tall. You think you're going to lose against a 3-year-old? No, you're absolutely going to win. And the child can feel the grandiosity, the compensation, the sense of superiority. I'm God. I'm going to beat the living daylights out of this child. You've got complete and utter confidence, and you've got God's blessing as well. He's the one who started the idea of seeing who's going to be part of the gang. I command you to slay your child and sacrifice him in my name. Okay, God, let's do it. Okay, you've proved your loyalty. We won't ask you to follow through. But, that's the kind of gang we've got here. Kill children in the name of the Lord, if so desired. Or sociopathic God, that wanders people around for 40 years. I mean, we couldn't hold on to a friendship and be considered decent human beings if we sent someone on a wild goose chase to our house. Come on over for dinner. The promised home, right? Dinner. Okay, I'm going to guide you there. Take a left here, and another left, and another left. You're going around in circles? I know, it's all part of my divine plan. Just do this for another 12 hours, and then, the dinner will be cold and all that, but you can arrive home, right? Well, no, this is a son of a bitch that does it for 40 years. And and will punish the living daylights of anyone who diverges from the path. So, by comparison, humans are mild. They don't even have flames for eternity. They just burn their children with cigarette butts for 5 or 10 minutes. But they've got nothing on God. All eternity? Burning lakes of fire for simply not doing what they're told? Goodness gracious, our parents are mild by comparison. The love and the healing of the abuser comes in the understanding that if they are abusing us, they have already been abused, and they have already co-opted and sided with their abuser. They have already betrayed the little one inside. They've already understood that it's pointless for their little one to fight the giant. So they're going to become the giant and fight another little one. That's going to be their way out of powerlessness. They're not going to be able to defend themselves. They're going to become the tyrant. And so, but that is a place of defeat. It's not fun being a tyrant. It's just more fun than feeling terrified and helpless in a sociopathic environment. It's at least more balanced to be both. I'm the victim here, now I'm the abuser here. There's balance. I'm not just topped over constantly by holding the culture's shame, because it is the shame of the cult, the inadequacy of the cult, that says, yes, this has been going on for hundreds of years, and we are committed to not teaching anything about it in school. Because that's the kind of cult we are. We throw our most vulnerable people to the dragon of lust, the dragon of addiction, the dragon of violence and fire, the dragon of ignorance. We make sacrifice after sacrifice of the virginal innocence of a child. And we demand the sociopathic engineering the adaptive personality to grow up in our cult. And that is a wound. That is a wound that everyone carries until they're willing to let it go. Until they understand the beliefs and the various things that participated in part of it, the role they played in allowing or adapting, the part of them that chose to be part of the drama at some level, for some reason, positive, negative, depends on the perspective. When we feel truly empowered, it is no fun to watch other people scream. When we feel helpless and small, it can be very pleasant to watch other people reminding us that we're not alone. When you look out with abundant joy, with confidence and mastery, and you have your view interrupted by the suffering, the traumas, the ignorances, and the fears of others, you feel deep compassion. You want to help. And you want to transform that region of the psyche, that region of the ecosphere, into something beautiful, so that when you look out, you're greeted with the beauty, truth, and goodness that is the deeper truth, that is the ultimate expression of mastery and of becoming, that we are on the way there, and we celebrate every healing, every becoming, etc. along the way. Forgiving self in this way is essential to having the capacity to feel, to have the energy to work with and release the abuse pattern by forgiving the abuser, which in turn leads to freedom, growth, change, power, which is synonymous with the ability and willingness to respond, which leads to a sense of peace. This is the breath in of a clumsy set of energy. This is the breath out of a transformed and masterfully integrated breath of energy. This is how we take in the raw ore and give out the diamond to ourself, which is synonymous with others, which is another reason, if we're fixated on punishing and not forgiving our abuser, we cannot forgive ourselves. Because the forgiven self, the loved, healed, and forgiven self, returns to the state of innocence. The innocence of the inner self always sees the purity, love, and goodness of God, Goddess, all that is, in those around, and wishes them well. That is the face of God and Goddess. That is the face of innocence. That unconditional love, that wishing, the true connection with the ultimate expression of the species and of all that is, which is synchrony with beauty, with truth, with goodness, with excellence, with joy, with love, for the simple reason that both pain and pleasure teach, that teaching leads to mastery, that mastery leads to power, that power leads to freedom, that freedom leads to choice. And when any self-loving human being has the power to freely choose whether to create more beauty, truth, and goodness in a state of excellence, or whether to create more rape and pillaging and whatever it is, the luminous is always more fun. And that's ultimately what it's all about. There's no right, no wrong, no lakes of fire unless you believe and create them. But beauty, truth, and goodness in a state of excellence is more fun. It's simply more delightful, more tasty, more pleasurable, more exciting. It's more fun. It's more fun to succeed than to fail. It's more fun to love than to hate. It's more fun to give gifts than it is to plot revenge. It's more fun if you have mastery and certainty. Now, it may be much more fun to plot revenge than to feel helplessly bullied again and again and humiliated and failing endlessly with no sense of mastery. In fact, you might learn mastery by plotting revenge. You might learn a little bit more about the mechanics of reality and the dark side, that at some point it becomes more fun to use in the light side. As when the US military and DARPA develops the internet to survive a Holocaust bunker, that's not a lot of fun. We've got to have this internet so that when we've blown everyone up, and we're all living underground on, disgusting dried rations. We have to be the winners of that, right? We've got to communicate, right? So let's invent the internet. Okay, so we invent it to survive that kind of relatively mediocre version of reality. But since we haven't blown ourselves up, well, let's use it to talk to one another and write and save postage. And I was thinking of you. Here you are. It's more fun to write pleasant, emails than negative emails. If we have the mastery to create a pleasant reality, it's not fun to be tortured and tormented and pretend everything's wonderful. But if you have mastery, you don't create torture to begin with. The mastery is expressed in the reality we create. To the degree that we create pain, shame, trauma is to the degree that we lack mastery. No individual in a state of real mastery says, I could experience unconditional love and joy and beauty, but I think I'm going to take one more round of punishing Mom. Because I'm willing to put up with a fair amount of misery as long as I can make her feel it with me. So I'm going to stick, this. That's a terrified, helpless child trying to get attention. It's not a masterful human being, an adult, who has genuine alternatives. And if we can just have mastery on the outside, I can buy everything, but I feel like a terrified small kid, it's the same thing. It's the mastery of one's inner state, which is a lot of what we're dealing with here, and the mastery of dealing with the outer reality. Until we forgive ourselves, we've brought in this energy and we're not letting it go. We've dissociated from it, and it's eating us alive in that pattern because it was pretty painful, or we wouldn't have traumatically dissociated. The self-love, the understanding, the forgiveness allows us to breathe that out. As we breathe out the pain and the wound, it's a short time later that we breathe out some form of release of our fixation around the abuser. They are teachers in a certain way. Can you learn mastery around this? When you can understand psychologically, biologically, scientifically, and statistically why you participated in the abuse in the way that you did, how it's not your fault, how it ties into this cult's level of evolution, and you can transcend that wound and maybe help someone else out. It's lovely once you learn how to step out of that wound to go and help another person. And watch them learn the mastery that you did and feel the freedom, the protection from the terror when they understand how they can pivot out of that reality into a reality where that particular abuse, at least, isn't going to occur. And ultimately, it ties in with very deep beliefs about our value and our worth. If we cannot understand our own worth, our own value, then the fact that we've managed to avoid the high school bully means we'll just create a valueless reality in some other way. And we'll have to learn that. The underlying belief is very important because we act consistently with it. If I say I'm a shit and I'm not lovable, you may be capable of loving me, but I'm capable of saying that you're not real, that the love isn't real. Because if I'm unlovable, it stands to reason that you cannot love me. It's an impossibility. Okay, so having decided that your love is impossible, you say you love me. That's a lie because it's impossible. You must be lying. And I'll just get the liars out of my space. The liars, the ones who say they love me, and we know they don't. We'll get them out of my space. And have the real people who are telling the truth that they don't love me, which is consistent with my belief that I'm unlovable. Okay, so now I've got a sane reality. My outer reality, thanks to a number of my actions, now matches my inner reality. And there we have it. I am unlovable. Do any of you love me? No? Okay, good. You're telling the truth, because that is the truth as I've decided, based on my belief. That's part of power. That's part of mastery. Dancing with beliefs, dancing with momentum, understanding the mechanics of the psyche, the mechanics of our outer world, understanding sustainability in our body, in our mind, in our greater ecology, and in our relationships with human beings.